Hello, my name is Judith Okonkwo, and I'm the founder of Immersive 3D. I'm really excited to talk to you all today about putting Africa first as we reimagine the future of immersive technology. Now, as I mentioned, I run Immersive 3D, which is an extended reality creation lab based in Lagos, Nigeria. And to get us started, I'd like to show you a little bit of the work we do in this next video. It's really great to see kind of like a whole community start to come together. But people, didn't really know that much about the technologies. Now, interested, really looking for ways to connect together, which is brilliant.
I used my friend VR and I tested it and it was fun because I was just following practical steps online. I brought it out for girls in my hostel to come and check and see the excitement in their face, looking at the whole thing. And some of them would ask me, what's this one? And I said, this is virtual reality and you really enjoy it.
There were several persons who asked, hey, that's great, and how do we learn more? Or that's also what someone suggested before, like how can I go further after this? So if people just say, oh, that's cool, and I try and then bye-bye, like, well, I'm already happy. But if they say, what's the next step, and how can I learn faster and better? I'm like, okay, they are actually interested in building for the medium. So that was very, very positive. Yeah, some cool ideas on what to do.
That was a little bit of our work at Immersive 3D, where we're investing in developing the ecosystem for the extended reality technologies, primarily out of our base in Lagos, Nigeria, but also across the African continent. And for those who are curious, the extended reality technologies is an umbrella term for augmented virtual and mixed reality. So if you have been paying attention to, African news or kind of like global news, you'd have heard quite a lot coming out of Nigeria in recent time about youth protests, a movement that started trending across the internet with a hashtag #EndSARS. And this was one that was dedicated to trying to get rid of a special unit of the police force that has been described as targeting young people, particularly people in the creative and the tech sectors. And I'm showing you some of the images from that kind of like really significant youth movement in the country, as well as some of the headlines where we really saw young people come together and start to step into their own as leaders in this decentralized, organic protest movement across the country. And I just want you to keep these images in your head as I go on to the next few slides and talk about the future of this continent as we know it. Now, the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, when they are talking about Africa's population last year, we knew that almost 60% of the population was under the age of 25, and even that made Africa the youngest continent in the world. When we start to project into the future, you'll see there that by 2100, Africa's youth population is projected to be equivalent to twice Europe's entire population. So we have a really young population that is growing rapidly. And I think if we consider those numbers, we can easily see how this population becomes the global workforce of the future. Now, I want to kind of like really highlight these with a few more numbers. One is that it's estimated that currently the median age in the African continent is 19.8. And the other is that for Nigeria, the projection is that by 2050, we will be the third most populous country in the world. And this is third after China and India. So just to kind of like give you the context where we are with a youth population that is coming into its own in terms of realizing their power and potential, and also the numbers that we will be encountering in the near future. Now, I think when we consider all of that, we should also definitely talk about the potential. And some really exciting news that came out of Nigeria recently was the acquisition of a fintech startup called Paystack by Stripe. And I think that, certainly for the Nigerian tech community, this was very, very exciting news because this was a homegrown startup. It had joined YC in 2016, and then has gone on to what is considered quite tremendous success. And this has been also a pointer that a lot of different members of the ecosystem have highlighted as an indicator of what is possible if we tap into the potential of our young people. And certainly in the context of those previous protests that I was talking about, I really want us to take all of this, as a backdrop as we now imagine the extended reality technologies. Now, as I said earlier, extended reality is the umbrella term that refers to augmented, virtual, and mixed reality. And if you've encountered these technologies in any way, you might know that back in 2016, that was the year that people were saying, oh my goodness, this is the year that we believe will be the year of VR. And subsequently since then, there's been a swing. Sometimes it's like, yes, VR is coming into its own. And then it's like, no, this is just an overhyped technology. But despite all the debates up, down, about virtual reality and the other realities, one thing that has really not been disputed by anybody is the fact that, the computing that these technologies represent, which is spatial computing, is the computing platform of the future. Now, I'm going to say that again. Spatial computing is the computing platform of the future. Like, this is not disputed. This is where we are all projected to go. I now want to bring this back to just like a little look at the landscape when we come to this extended reality industry. I want to take you back to 2016, which, as I mentioned, was the year that most people considered the year of VR. And then subsequently was like, this is just the hype cycle starting. Now, 2016 was pivotal because in the period between 2014 and 2016, the investments in VR and AR, as well as the number of patents that were being registered, increased by a factor of 5. So there was a lot happening, and people were really excited. And it had been preceded in 2014 by the purchase of Oculus by Facebook. And at that time, Oculus was this startup that had literally started, those Silicon Valley stories you hear in a garage, and then had gone on to create this headset that was going to drive in kind of like the modern consumer era for virtual reality. Now, I want you to take a look at the slide that I have up that looks at AR and VR spending forecast going up to 2023. And you'll notice that it highlights consumer spending and industry spending. And that industry spending is growing significantly with, that projected growth being 134%. For me, and I would say for most of the other industry watchers, this means that future that is, underlined completely by spatial computing is going to become a reality. I don't think that people are now debating it as much and wondering how it will take root or not. And this is because we're seeing use cases in so many areas. Now, back in the day, for example, you might know that virtual reality was used by the United States Air Force or NASA to train their astronauts, and we're talking 50 years ago, perhaps 60 years ago. But today, if we look at the modern era of these technologies, we see a lot of use cases from medical training to manufacturing, and particularly during this pandemic where so many people have been push to really embrace working virtually and online. We see this now as a medium that is being embraced to bring people together in the ways that perhaps if you're a fan of Ready Future One, you were already kind of like thinking about Ready Player One, I mean. So we know that with this technology, we have a future that is going to be wholly dependent on it. And I think that brings us to a really critical point, which is what will the role be of this African continent in that future? What will happen to all of the young people um, that we talked about in the beginning who do not yet have access to these technologies? I mentioned that the work that we're doing is focused on trying to develop the ecosystem. And this is work that we started in 2016. And certainly at that time, and I would say even now, there are significant barriers to access for most people. There are the infrastructure challenges that you might well imagine around electricity and the internet. Certainly, there are challenges when it comes to things like funding, because despite all of the really large numbers that have been invested in these technologies, I can tell you that less than 1% has come to the African continent. Alongside that, of course, there is the access issue. So when we consider the majority of the big tech companies, they do not make their products readily available in sub-Saharan Africa. So there's already that challenge, even if you could afford it, which is not the case for the majority of people here, you then have to think about where you're going to go to be able to get it. Now, I think that, for us to be able to play a role when it comes to these technologies, there must be an African strategy. And this is coming home to us and saying, what is it that we are going to do to make sure that we are part of this computing platform that defines the future of all of us in the world? And I think that there are 5 pillars, if you will, that will inform that. One is talent, of course. We must, really focus on developing talent because we know there is a lot of raw potential on the continent, but both XR and allied technologies like AI that support it. There must be policy that will inform this. And this is multi-stakeholder engagement to create an enabling environment for XR. We really need our governments to come together and say, what is it that we need to do to encourage more young people to get into the space, to make business thrive in the space? Of course, there's industry. And this is really about the resources and funding so that we can support people who want to start up XR businesses. Education, of course, is critical. And I see this in, a number of ways. Apart from educating people so they know about these technologies and can create with them, it's also about us actually utilizing these technologies within our educational system, because I see them as tools that can allow us to leapfrog some of the grand challenges that we currently have. And then finally, there's research and development, which is such a critical element when it comes to us deciding how best we can utilize these technologies or shape them so that they start to serve our purposes and create the solutions we need. Because I don't think anybody else is going to do that for us. Now, alongside this African strategy, if you will, for XR, I think that there must be this global agenda around extended reality where we see the rest of the world saying, we want Africa to be part of this. We want them to be part of this future. And that will mean that we're now part of the global agenda for these technologies. That when plans are being made in organizations, that Africa is not this black spot on the map, but somewhere where they're actively thinking, what are we going to do? And that takes me to the inclusive XR strategies that I think must be a part of every big tech company that is involved in the field. Partnerships will be critical. And these are partnerships, across different types of institutions, from academia right through to special interests, but ones that will help us become a closer global network of XR professionals, enthusiasts, and learners. Access, of course, is key, and this will happen in multiple ways if organizations are ready to invest in making sure that their products and services are available on the African continent. And then, of course, there's always funding, which really underpins so much of what I've spoken about, where we must think about how funding, opportunities are are not just centered on specific areas of the world, but are much more inclusive. Now, you might think, why in the world should this be on the global agenda? Why should the rest of the world care about what happens on the African continent when it comes to the extended reality technologies? And I'll give you two major reasons that tie into some of what we've talked before. The first are the young people that I started off this discussion with. Now, that population now and in the future, in the next 10, 20, 30 years, will be the workforce that drives a lot of what goes on in the world. And do we want that workforce to not have the skills and tools that they need to be able to utilize the technologies that will define our everyday future? The second reason is that when we look at a lot of the grand challenges that affect us in the world, and particularly the ones that are critical in the African continent, if I think specifically of Nigeria, one of those is education. And when I look at the education situation, we, for example, have the most number of children who are out of school in the world, about 13 million. We are severely under-resourced when it comes to education. We are over capacity. And certainly when you look at, the gaps and the budget, you know that with traditional means, there's no way that we're actually going to be able to sort that out. But I believe with technologies like extended reality, VR, for example, you can go into a school that is maybe a 70 or 80 to 1 ratio for students to teachers without labs and set up a VR lab that will then allow them to have a range of virtual experiences that then start to plug the gap between what they have and real quality education. It will mean that they can do, virtual experiments in labs or go on virtual field trips, that sort of thing. But it starts to solve critical challenges for us that will then lead to this productive workforce of the future. So, immersive technology reimagined, that's what it looks like when a world comes together with a global agenda that is supported by an African strategy for the extended reality technologies. Thank you.